Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our episode of the SHINEcast. This new amazing episode. If you can't tell, we're in a little bit of a different scenery today. We are at the wellness conference, Napa Valley Wellness Conference, and we're here to interview Dr. Janet Taylor. Welcome.
Thanks so much. Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah. Could you tell us a little bit about who you are, what you have to do with mental health and mental wellness, and sort of just, a little bit about your work?
Sure. So my name is Janet Taylor. Pronouns are she, her, hers. I live in Sarasota, Florida. I'm a psychiatrist and life coach, do organizational development. I've pretty much spent my career working in under-resourced communities with individuals either uninsured or underinsured, worked in jails, and basically that's what I've done the whole time. And now just recently, a month ago, started working for the ACLU, the Advanced Civil Liberties Union, where I work with, there's 54 affiliates across the United States, work with the 54 affiliates, and we have a national office. So that's what I do.
Very interesting. Fascinating.
So
should we just dive into the questions?
Yeah. I mean, specifically, we're here to talk about that book you wrote about the courageous classroom. So do you want to kind of give like a really quick synopsis, summary of what that book is about before we start asking you our little questions about it?
Absolutely. So I wrote a book called The Courageous Classroom and Creating Strategies for Students to Learn and Thrive, and creating a culture for students to learn and thrive. And I'm not a teacher. The book was written for K through 12 educators. So when I started writing it by myself, I realized I really needed a co-author. And the publishers found Jed Dearyberry, who was a teacher. He still teaches, but does a lot of consulting, from South Carolina, Teacher of the Year, gay, had a lot of trauma, was bullied by his colleagues, bullied growing up. And so he just added a really great voice for education, and then just that personal experience that we needed. So as I mentioned, the book was for K through 12 educators, came out during COVID, so kind of hard to promote, but people have found it like you all found the book. So I'm really happy about that.
Obviously, writing a book is hard. So I think the first question that I have in mind is what inspired you to write it? Because you need a lot of motivation, a lot of inspiration to be able to write a book the way you did. So first off, what inspired you to start it in the first place? And then also what kept you motivated throughout the whole writing process?
That's a great question. I'm sure, well, you guys are young, but at some point in your lives, you're going to go, wow, I should write a book. Almost everybody says I should write a book. But what really pushed me was Wiley, the publisher, came to me and asked me to do it. At the time, I was doing a lot of TV, living in New York, and they wanted me to write the book. So I said yes. And what really kept me going was the fact that I said I was going to do it, had a contract. But the more I delved into the research and talking to people, just wanted to finish. So that's what kept me going.
Sort of in a not so similar vein, there are a lot of concepts in your book that might be very novel to some teachers who maybe aren't as familiar with these mental health concepts that you refer to in the book, such as teaching like emotional intelligence. So my question is, how did you address those concepts in a more digestible manner for people who aren't maybe as familiar with the idea of teaching those concepts?
Another great question. So, really the reason we wrote the book and my framework was that so much of what needs to happen when students are ready is what happens outside the classroom. So wanted to get a sense of the mental health, mental wellness, what was going on with teachers, students, their parents, or caregivers in their communities before they get to school. And so in that vein, this book is really written for parents, students, and teachers. But there are concepts like emotional intelligence, which can be broken down by the fact that even kids as young as 4 and 5 have a sense of cognitive regulation or emotional intelligence. They're really as concerned as adults during those ages about right from wrong, and have a sense when somebody doesn't feel well or not. So being able to tap into your own intuition, your own feelings, and show empathy for someone else, or be able to use how you feel as a guide about how you're going to interact with someone else. If kids 3 or 4 can do it, then certainly our teachers and parents can do it. I think what happens is people are so caught up in their own lives, or so caught up in making a point, that they don't utilize those factors of emotional intelligence, which include those cognitive factors, and cognitive just meaning thinking about what you're thinking, what you're feeling, what the situation is, so that hopefully you can have the outcome that you want.
That is really interesting, and I do think that education is just in general outside of the classroom, and then the classroom is just where you apply all of that. So I guess I'm also wondering, like, as a mother and like also as parents, what do you think the parents can do to kind of help shape their children out this way, to be able to be courageous in the classroom?
It's really important that parents or caregivers really focus on helping our kids and young people really develop into the people they want them to be. And so what parents need to do, caregivers need to do, is ask our kids how they're doing, like how was your day, and really care about it, to talk to them about maybe challenges that they've had as parents, what their lives are like. I think so often young people have so much pressure because you're on TikTok, you're on Instagram or whatever, Snapchat you're on, and people delete pictures they don't like or only show the good times. And for you guys have a lot of pressure because I think there are unrealistic expectations sometimes placed upon you that allow or force you to compare yourself to other people. The level of bullying that happens on social media is another constraint. And then just exposure to things that sometimes many teenagers aren't ready for. And if we don't talk to our kids about what they're experiencing or check in and see how we're doing, then sometimes the wrong ideas can get formulated in your heads, and it just adds too much. So we really need to check in daily. How was your day? How's it going? What can I answer for you? What do you need? And need not in a monetary way or something that you like want to buy, but like, what do you need from me? So we need to connect more.
And on the flip side of that, I know you mentioned that in order to have a courageous classroom, you need courageous students as well. Mm-hmm. So let's say maybe a student isn't as receptive to the idea of showing the courageous characteristics that you described in your book. How do you sort of direct a teacher or parent to encourage that student to learn to be more courageous?
So I think it's really important that we know that the courageous is with a little c, not a big C. Mm-hmm. Courageous doesn't mean that you're doing something so big or, rushing into burning buildings or saving a car that's rolling down the street. Courageous is in the fact that you show up and you get up, right? Mm. And how it is when you show up to class. Are you ready? Did you get enough sleep? Did you get enough to eat? Do you have the right mindset? And so it's really about your presence and being ready to participate. You don't have to be perfect. And that's what being courageous really is. Even like you might have come from a situation where you didn't have breakfast, or your parents might have been yelling at you in the morning, or not even there. You got yourself to school. Like, that's courageous. So really acknowledging the fact that if you got to school and you're ready, then you're already courageous. And how do you build on that? And that's what we really need to amplify. There are so many of our students, we have no idea what they're going through before they get into the classroom. So let's cheer them on that they got there and support them in every way that we can.
I know for a lot of students that I've known, being courageous, again with the little c, as he said, is more difficult for them because they themselves don't feel that they're capable of being courageous. So I think it's important for not just as teachers and parents, but as peers, we communicate that they have that capacity to be courageous. And like you said, just by showing up, mm-hmm. they are being courageous.
Absolutely. And that's really the point. And that's why it's so important what you all are doing is, certainly by putting yourselves out there. I can't think of anyone who's more courageous. And you're so professional and ready, but you can tell you care. You care about yourselves, you care about your peers you're working with, and you care about the people you're around. So how can we extend that more to our classmates and really support them? If we see someone that maybe doesn't have a pencil or doesn't have a paper or whatever nowadays, being able to plug, like helping them to just show that you see them and you care about them. It's so important.
I don't think a lot of people realize too that with those small actions of just giving someone a pencil like that can mean the world to someone, and that can be really like just a courageous thing to do, because I also feel like, kind of like what Damien was saying, that a lot of students don't feel like they have that capacity. I also don't feel like they realize just what they're doing, like even just by showing up. Like I don't mm-hmm. think they realize, they think like that's the bare minimum, but it is, but you're doing it, and that is something to be proud of. So I think a lot of people students especially, they don't realize that, because they feel like they should be doing more and they should be above and beyond. It would be like the most model student ever. So it's really nice to hear that just by doing the minimal things, the small things, like showing up and being there and being awake and present, it's enough. It's more than enough, because it's a step at least.
I mean, life is all about small things. You know, so often we look to the end, right? Or we look to some grand thing, but it's the little steps that we take that make up the big things. And that's why when people are trying to change behavior or trying to create something, they don't understand that it starts with you. And if you just made one small improvement, like you're on, and then just to keep building and keep building.
All right. So there's also a page in your book, very specific, that during one of our meetings we were looking it over, where you talk about, I'm pretty sure it was 7 tips to building a courageous classroom and the environment. You talked about a courageous classroom, what a courageous student has, what a courageous teacher includes. And there's this one part that I'm pretty sure was in the courageous student section, which was what you called cultural humility. Mm-hmm. And I read that part and I thought that really spoke to me, but I also wanted more of a clarification, because specifically I think that term is wonderful and I think it is vital, but I wanted to see how you interpret cultural humility as.
Yeah, so, so often, especially now, we talk about cultural competency. And so for many people, cultural competency could have been if, let's say you work like me, I don't speak Spanish, and a lot of my patients speak Spanish, and maybe I can get a translator. That's considered culturally competent, but that's not really enough. Cultural competency is when you have empathy, is when you make sure that people understand, that need to understand what you're saying, that you're truly able to put yourself in their shoes and really think what it would be like to be sitting in their position. And you also, cultural humility also means that there's a power balance, not a power imbalance. So it's consciously thinking of those things. So it's not just window dressing as culture. It's like, I want to get in there, get messy with it, and make sure that not only when you walk away are you understanding, but you're able to utilize what you need to in a way that you can. So it takes a lot more work, but it's where we need to be.
That is interesting and really useful. Uh-huh. So I love everything about it. I love everything about it, and I do think it's really important because, especially in the modern world, I feel like a lot of people are kind of worried about how the way they treat different cultures. They're worried, they feel like they're not doing enough, or they feel like they're doing too much, and it's just like this subconscious barrier that there is. So I'm glad that you touched upon cultural humility. You described also in the same bullet point a student as creative, resilient, and whole. And I do agree that a courageous student and any student who is creative is really important, especially growing up and to learn, along with being resilient because life is challenging. But I also want to know what you meant by whole. Like whole in what sense?
So what I mean as whole is even the broken parts make you whole. Mm-hmm. I talked earlier today about kintsugi, which is when, a glass breaks or pottery breaks and it's put back together with gold or silver, which makes it more valuable. So often in so many of our kids, I'm sure your peers, maybe even you all, have grown up with trauma or things that seem like they leave a dent or a hole or a scar. And so instead of covering that with continued pain or shame, it's really about how you grew from it and the fact that you're still want to achieve and you still want to do things, and that's what makes people whole. You have everything that you need. What you need, I guess, academically, if you want to get a degree or, work and do all those things, that's important, but you have everything you need, so you're whole. It's not like you need something from outside of you to complete you. So it's about tapping in and finding what that is that helps you continue to grow, that you can water and nurture much like you would a seed and that grows into a tree. You have it, and that's what I mean by wholeness.
Sort of moving away from that, I know in your book you touched on some of Brene Brown's teachings. First off, my mom's a huge fan of Brene Brown, so I've heard quite a bit about her. But you mentioned something about her philosophies with regards to vulnerability and how that also plays into the making of a courageous classroom. Would you care to expand on that?
So Brene Brown, is a psychologist, and, in her book, she talks about how courage, even she didn't invent this, but courage is from the heart, right? So that courage comes from the heart. And so when you think about vulnerability, it's not a weakness. It's really an opening that can come from trust, but that can let you know what you need to do next. And when you're vulnerable and open to pain, that means that you can fix it. And so whether it's forgiveness or, moving away from guilt or shame to really accepting what happened to you, or maybe something that you've done, then that can allow yourself to heal so that you can move on to what's next. And so frequently that forgiveness means forgiving yourself first, and then recognizing that nobody expects you to be a perfect human being, but hopefully to learn from your mistakes and keep growing.
So your book specifically obviously only covers classrooms and teachers and students and more of like what it looks like in a school setting. But do you think any of the points that you've listed when it comes to courageousness in your book, do you think they can also be applied out of school, like in the workplace or at a hospital or just in general with your friends, any other situation?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, because it's all about spaces, right? In this case, it was education, a school is that space. But if you think about a space is really any place where there's more than one person. So all of those principles can apply in the sense of, from a landscape of calm and just trying to take down the temperature, or how people can relax, how they can think about when you're going somewhere, what do you need to do to be psychologically ready? Literally, what needs to be in your backpack no matter where you're going? And then how ultimately do you just get what you need from that interaction? And so again, it's with a little c, and it's how we live. But those interactions can be anywhere.
Thank you.
Well, I got all my big questions out of the way, and I'm excited now.
Yeah,
I'm happy. I'm at peace.
I have too many questions for one podcast, but I think we're going to pass it on to Ava and 10 next. They're going to offer up their questions, their unique insight, and stay tuned.
Well, thank you both. You're tremendous interviewers.
Oh, well, thank you.
Thanks. You make me blush.
We try.
Keep it up.
Varying rates of success, but we try.
So welcome back, you guys, from the last segment of today's episode with Dr. Taylor, who is a psychiatrist, entrepreneur, self-care coach, mother, and columnist.
One question that we have about your book is, how did you narrow down in sort of like a bullet point list the type of characteristics of courageous teachers, classrooms, and students and everything? Like, was it related to your personal experiences, or, what sparked that list of characteristics and everything?
Yeah, so, having gone through school a lot, my mom was a teacher. I have 4 daughters. So not only did I experience school as a student, undergrad and then grad school but also with my girls. And then I had a co-author who's a teacher. So together, really thinking about those characteristics of what makes a great teacher and a courageous teacher, we kind of came with it from personal experience and then kind of anecdotal.
So your mom's a teacher?
She was a teacher. She passed away, but yes, she was an English teacher.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
So
and I like to say she was my first teacher. In fact, I wrote that in the book, in the dedication.
So was it like her specific methods that like inspired that list for you and everything?
There's no question. My mom, from as early as I can remember, I mean, she was always, pushing me to read and do the best I could in school. Was very focused not only on me, but also kids around in the neighborhood, just really maximizing education, taking advantage of opportunities. And she was also one of those kind of people that would find opportunities, not just for me and my brother, it was just the 2 of us, but how she could also lift other kids in the community all the time.
So it extended like outside of school and everything?
There's no question. I mean, because if you think about teaching, right, it's not just in the classroom, it's in the interaction. It's what we show people and hopefully make them better. So you don't have to formally be a teacher to certainly influence someone in terms of their curiosity or learning or remind them of something. So teaching is something that hopefully all of us do. I mean, you all are teaching me something, looking at the way you're interacting and jumping in with the tech and how you work together. I mean, it's so inspiring. It really is.
It's all just a facade.
No. Don't ruin it, 10.
No, I wanted to kind of piggyback off of you. I know you've mentioned earlier that your co-author was a gay man.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering, like, what reforms, if any, do you have in mind about kind of reducing the stigma and normalizing and having those conversations about sexual orientation, sexual identity, and kind of all that jazz?
Mm-hmm. Big question, but I think we need to talk about it. So definitely sex education's different in terms of biology and teaching children about their bodies and good touches, bad touches, and all of those things that hopefully can protect children. So that's one thing, or teaching how babies, where they come from, right? But then sexual orientation, or who you love or how you identify, is something that I think we need to not only teach it in schools, but also make children and teenagers aware that it's okay to talk about. Because, when you were growing up, then your sexual identity, how you feel, your biology can be confusing. And some kids may be attracted to someone in their same sex, and that can be confusing. Sometimes they'll feel guilty or be bullied. And later that may change, right? It's about the freedom. But what we want to do is create an environment where, you can learn and then explore in a way that doesn't, hurt yourself or hurt anybody else. So I think what needs to happen is to really create learning, have schools be really learning environments where you're open to facts, not just what people think, and then and not persuading kids in one way or another, but give them the opportunity to talk about it. Because so many young people who may be going through challenging situations about their sexual orientation end up depressed, they end up alone, higher rates of suicidality and depression and anxiety, and it shouldn't be like that. So I think we have to create courageous classrooms that allow any conversation to be answered with facts, in a non-judgmental way, but in one that helps people feel like, and students especially, that they can really say anything. And so that should not be legislated politically unless it's legislated to be more open and inform people. But certainly we don't want to shut people down or have kids feel like they're doing something bad because they have a question that makes adults feel uncomfortable. That's not the case. We want our kids to feel comfortable and feel free.
And that reminded me of something, sorry. Because you mentioned earlier that you're from Florida, and I heard that AP psychology, the entire course was just banned for those exact reasons, for the discussions of sexual orientation and everything. And
they've banned books.
Yeah.
You can't even use, it's infuriating. You can't even use the word equity. Certainly it is constrained what teachers can do. They have call-in lines where parents can call and report teachers. And so it's really created an environment where people are walking on eggshells. Meanwhile, the same social problems that we have continue to multiply. So it reminds you that in your home, the freedom of your home, as parents or as kids, you can find the books that you want to read, have those discussions. That just because you can't do it in school or in different offices doesn't mean you have to stop. But it really makes you think about the kind of country that we want. And certainly, when our democracy is at stake, our rights are at stake, and we have the opportunity and the freedom, the First Amendment, to say whatever we'd like, right? You don't always have to agree, but at least we have that right to do that. So we don't want to go back and lose that.
No, especially. I remember the bill you're talking about is the Don't Say Gay bill.
Mm-hmm.
How, just the name of that bill is it just blows my mind away.
Yeah, to score political points, right? Then
exactly, and
you're hurting people.
Yeah, and it's one thing that stands out to me is that, like you said, with our First Amendment, our freedom of speech and our freedom, I think that's freedom of choice as well. It kind of violates that, and it pushes an agenda based on hate instead of what I'm interpreting the courageous classroom as kind of being open-minded and accepting, and not kind of belittling and shoving people down and forcing them to not express who they really are.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right, because our kids come to school with enough trauma and abuse, and we know that almost 80% of children have at least one adverse childhood experience, whether it's parents getting divorced or separated or something like that. And we also know that a traumatized brain does not learn as easily as someone who has not had as much trauma in terms of remembering or just constantly trying to source things out. Am I safe or not safe? And so to create environments that are courageous, that give all of our students the same chance, which we know doesn't happen either, right? But that's what we hope for, that all students have the same chance to learn, same expectations, and are not limited by the color of their skin, their sexual orientation, the neighborhoods they live in, that we just want to elevate them all and make them really turn into the human beings with the potential that they have. And that's what education should be, right? That's what a courageous classroom does, is hopefully presents ideas and presents evidence in a way that allows students to certainly pay attention to their own experience. We all have our own experiences and what we have been exposed to, but to come up with some thoughts and some strategies and a viewpoint that can be different. We don't need a society of people who all think the same way.
Earlier you said that kids are like redeemable, right? And that kind of made me think of a question. So with your description of a courageous student, do you think that some of those characteristics are like more inherent in some students? Do you think that some kids are like naturally courageous? And if not, like how do you think those types of students typically develop that faster than others?
I think we're all courageous, right? But there are factors, to your point, that go into how we present ourselves to the world. Some of it can be genetics, what we inherit from our parents, and some can be our personalities, and the other part can be what our experiences have been. And that's why when kids who have been traumatized or told like to sit down or don't say anything or you're a kid or all those factors, all those come into play. But at the end of the day, because we have a brain, then we all have, and a heart, we all have the ability to be courageous. It's just a matter of whether you're encouraged to speak up, whether you're encouraged, if everybody's going one way, for you to go the other way. But that potential's within everyone.
How would you recommend the student to like develop those attributes more?
Well, I think one thing is we have to encourage our students to get off of their cell phones or smartphones, and parents too, right? And to read, like to get different viewpoints or to ask questions, not just if someone says something, if I say, Ten's hair is curly, and Ava, you're like, no, it's not, it's ringlets, just make it up, still curls, right? But we can talk about what's the difference between a curl and a ringlet. And so really go deeper than just the surface. So we stop accepting things that are just said as just 100% true, but really trying to understand why. And question in a way that spurs more curiosity and more learning, and then going to a valid source to find out why.
And I like how you mentioned technology, because I know that your book was published like around like quarantine that time. So do you think that the online classes, Zoom, and like the rise of social media usage, do you think that that's changed the idea of what a courageous classroom is?
Well, definitely. I think if you think of the classroom as any place there's learning, and that can happen as long as there's more than one person in terms of a classroom. When I look at work and the experience of work, hybrid versus actually like going in every day, now like your generation and even older are like, we will never work every day, go and like, why did you all do that, right? Whereas before, that's what we did, and so that's the way it was. But I think what gets lost sometimes, if people are working from home or hybrid, like you miss the camaraderie, right? You miss the one-on-one, you miss talking about things that may have nothing to do with work, or someone who could help you at work and give you some answers. So definitely, when we wrote The Courageous Classroom, had no idea of the impact, especially on learning socially, that would happen for students, and certainly could have addressed it. For instance, young kids coming back like kindergarten and first grade, because their kind of formative years are spent at home and they weren't in preschool, some of them don't know how to line up to walk to the water fountain or tie their shoes or to raise their hand to ask for help. So those social skills that are so critical as part of learning certainly are being missed. And we know for certain kids, depending on where they lived, in some cases they've lost 2 years worth of science or math or English. So really there's a key, and there's a reason why classroom settings have worked. Sometimes someone may ask a question that you were thinking and didn't ask, or just being able to learn from other people. So we, across Zoom line, across technology, we still have to check in with how people are doing and making sure that on the other end, the message, what we're trying to say, really gets heard.
Yeah, because we're both seniors, so our first year of high school was online, and I think that I feel like the classroom setting didn't really bounce back from that even until like after my first year of high school, which was like my sophomore year. I feel like participation was still like kind of lacking in some classes. Like some students were like more scared to ask for help, because on Zoom classes personally, they were just not very engaging for me. It was like staring at a blank screen. No one was participating, no one was talking. Building relationships with teachers and students was just not a thing. And
it makes me sad what you all experienced during that time, and even college kids who went to school. It adds another layer of stress and anxiety. But the good thing is, you're seniors, so you went in and you made it through your Zoom classes, and you're motivated to go on and really looking at those lessons that you learned in terms of what you missed and how you need to communicate, what you need to do to get your point across, and how do you need to connect to people. So you all will really be well positioned when it comes time to really give examples of how to work together, which all of you do, that from that vantage point of when it's only you versus what it takes to be on a team, I think you'll all be uniquely qualified to give some really good examples of how you can break through that isolation and work together.
Yeah, and I was wondering, like, to get in the nits and grits, I don't know if that's
the nitty-gritty, yeah.
Yeah. What specific educational reforms could be put in place to kind of promote like trades programs, and as well as add other classes that wouldn't otherwise be offered? So
it's our tax dollars, right? And you're at the age where you could go to school board meetings and make your views heard, and hopefully at least make people on the school board understand like your experience and what you would want to see. And so I think, unfortunately, too often we leave it up to certain people who are constantly ringing the bell or making the case, or, we leave it up to politicians who, in my opinion, have made people feel hopeless and helpless, like your voice doesn't matter, your vote doesn't matter. It does. So you should go to a school board meeting here and see what they talk about. And when they have the time that you can raise your hand and say, you should ask them that question. And that's the power that you have. I mean, it really is a power of one, but you should find out, because it is our tax dollars that pay for public school education, and your voice makes a difference. It really does.
Hey, everybody, March 14th. No, I'm just kidding.
No, truly, you should go and check it out. It truly makes a difference. In Sarasota, there was a woman who was on the school board who was really pushing like the Don't Say Gay, and there was
on which school?
In Sarasota, in Florida, where I live, and it was a high school student who was he would go to the school board meetings and challenge her, and even at graduation, he said something that made national news. And then recently, she and her husband had this big scandal, and she had to resign, and he came back and said something again. But he was like 17, and his voice was heard. So it matters. What you all are doing matters, because if you think about it, one of the biggest things that changed communication and how we engage was the printing press, like in the 1700s. And now you have a voice, like what you're doing. So you can make, I think there's so many things that are on the news that don't impact our lives at all. And what you are doing, from mental health to asking the questions to standing up, being role models, really makes a difference. So don't underestimate that. It's really powerful. And you've got to thank the folks who are leading you and guiding you, and Daisy's back. And it really, really makes a big difference. So it matters.
I appreciate that. I feel like myself, as well as many others, could attest to how I feel like I'm procrastinating like every day.
But you're showing up, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you should want to do better, right? You should have goals, but you can't say if you were procrastinating, you wouldn't have been here today. You're here.
Yeah.
Right? So you dream and have it planned out, and you keep working at it, but it matters.
Thank you. It's very inspiring.
It's true. You guys are inspiring me. I wish I had done this when I was in high school. I didn't. I never knew how to. I can barely
I think
operate
with the
my
rise
computer
of
now. So.
social media, it's like there are so many more opportunities to like use your voice and everything.
There are, but you guys, you're learning like what's behind it. It's not just typing into something. Like, you're learning the nuts and bolts, and now you've learned the power. Like, you will always be able to make your voice heard if you have an opinion, because you can tape something and say it. A lot of people can't do that. Most people can't do that.
I kind of have one more question.
Okay.
I don't know. This might not make the cut, but this is very interesting. According to the history of American education, I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but it was founded by a wealthy businessman, one of the wealthiest people in the world to date, and oil tycoon, John D. Rockefeller. And he was not an educator. And he specifically said that he wanted a nation of workers, not thinkers. And he is the person who kind of shaped the current system of our education. It's kind of like a 9-to-5, like a daycare. Your parents, because at that time a lot of parents went to work and they needed somebody to take care of their kids, so they sent them into these you know what I'm saying, the school, and it was kind of like they were there for 9 to 5, and like the classrooms, and it was to kind of indoctrinate them into the worker's life, right? Because you could only go to the bathroom if you raise your hand very politely, and then you could go, and you can't go otherwise. And as well as, you get a 30-minute lunch break at half the time break. And so I was wondering, like, kind of looking at the American education system from its founding, it's very corrupt. And what alternative education systems have you seen or are familiar with that could kind of...
Yeah, no, I applaud that research. That really made me think in a way that I hadn't before how much it is. School is like a 9 to 5, right? And really automated, and which happened too when we had time and could, monitor how much time people worked or went to school. So if you think about now and how, as you mentioned, the clubs, right, and thinking and journalism and all those other factors, and how in class sometimes if you raise your hand and ask a different question, the teachers may be like, not now. And so how we do need to get to a class of thinkers. Certainly there are schools that are based on being able to think. A lot of those are private. Being able to test. I mean, I think like Brown University is a university that's like that, where I think, I don't think they give grades or something, right? But it's really meant to be like how you can converse and think. And if you can imagine the issues that we have now, where we're not encouraged to think differently, and it's just like my way or no way. So to your point, we need more thinkers. We need people who are able to not only express themselves, but think about wide points of view, and to challenge the status quo, and to have an argument that is valid and has points. Like, we need people to think. But this society, and the way we educate, the way we reward people is not based on thinking, right? It's based on like you
following
fitting
a test.
Exactly.
And memorizing.
But what I'd say is, a school doesn't have to be the only place you think, right? If you want to learn to write, you can write outside of school. You can practice what you want to do outside of school. So, like, that's the power that we have, is that we don't have to be limited by the systems that we're in, because we can all, like, the greatest people, in my opinion, in the world are the ones who might have been oppressed but saw a different way and made their voices heard. So we don't have to be subject to other people's limitations of us. We have that freedom and power and free will just to say no, and to stand up and say that isn't right. We can do it by protest. We can do that by writing. We can do that by what you're doing now. Not that I'm saying that you have to have all these controversial topics on, but you could, right? And so we still have that opportunity.
Yeah. I also think these are like the tough questions that need to be said. And that reminds me of, I forget exactly when it was. I think it was around the 80s Reagan administration era, where they standardized tests. And that was like a major shift of American public education, where the whole nation had to adhere to these specific tests that everybody needs to take. And how there wasn't room for teaching this other topic. The whole year of that class was dedicated to, like the AP exam, for example, dedicated to...
It still happens.
To a curriculum.
Teaching to the test still happens.
Yeah.
And then what happens is, if you fall outside of that, then they'll find ways, especially charter schools, to get you outside so that your low grade doesn't reflect in their overall grade. And so we're still missing a wide swath of kids who may have not had the same experience about early reading and may come in behind, and then what happens to them? So you're right. I mean, our education system, we have to fix it, because it's level of education that this is the greatest predictor for how long you live and healthcare outcomes. And education is the only way when you talk about jobs or, how you're going to provide your basic needs. So we have to work on it. And I think with students like you two, or you four there, there's a chance, right? But you have to keep pushing for fighting against inequity and inequality and using your voice, because it matters.
No, yeah, definitely. Like they say, knowledge is power. And I believe that some people want to kind of restrict that, our access to knowledge, because it wouldn't kind of benefit them. for
Well,
us knowing.
Right, because they want to be the experts. They want to be the ones we're listening to, and it can't be like that.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to wrap it up. So I just wanted to thank you so much. That was really insightful. I learned a lot.
Thank you for your
Yeah.
questions, and you all keep it up. It really means a lot.
Yeah. I especially liked when you talked about, like, we don't have to, like, conform to, like, the system. Like, you can learn outside of school and everything. So, yeah, I learned a lot,
Absolutely.
different perspectives and everything.
And wait
So,
till you get to college. You're going to be like, what? Really?
But yeah, you guys can tune in on next episode of SHINEcast.
Thank you.